Life is hard. Life can be cruel and unpredictable. And let me want to just start by sharing a story with you of a little girl called Mila. This is Mila. I don't know if you can see it or not. Can we turn down so we can see the light for just a bit, so we can see, maybe just completely off for now. That's Mila, a happy 3-year-old girl. She lives in Endeavor Hill, not far from here. Let me read to you. She appears on the newspaper just a few days ago on Thursday. Let me read to you. On a bright Melbourne morning during school day drop-off hour, 3-year-old Mila was crossing busy Heatherton Road with family members when she was struck by a car. Sounds of the horrific crash echoed through nearby backyards in Melbourne's suburban southeast, followed by terrified cries, turning an otherwise normal Thursday morning into a nightmare. Mila rushed to Dandenong Hospital, then transferred to Royal Children's Hospital in critical condition, and police later confirmed on Friday morning that she had passed away. Can I have the lights back on, please? We can't even begin to imagine how hard this must be for Mila's family. Her mom later shared, "I can still see Mila's face. She looks so worried every time I close my eyes." And she assured her, "Mommy's here for you. Love you, Mila." What a terrible tragedy. And stories like this is not unique. Sadly, it happens every day. The question is, how can we make sense of this? Tragedy like this that happen every day. Now, in our passage today, we also face with a great tragedy. Perhaps as it was read to us, we don't feel the impact of this. But it is a tragedy nonetheless. A great injustice was done to a teenage boy by the name of Joseph, 17-year-old. His father, Jacob, or Israel in the scripture, in the passage that we read, was not only helpless, but hopeless. There was no hope. He can't do anything about it. He wasn't given a choice to do anything about his beloved son, Joseph. Now, there's so many questions that demand an answer in this life, especially even in this passage. So this morning, I just want to invite us to look at 3 questions. The first one is the question on suffering. And the second thing we're going to look at is the question on purpose. Why suffering? And the third thing is the question on God. On suffering, on purpose, and on God. So on suffering. Tragedy doesn't wait for anyone. It happens. Just to anyone. It happens every day. And for Joseph, this in chapter 37 is just like any other day. But today, for Joseph, tragedy will strike. He just didn't know it yet. Now, if you have friends who do not believe in Jesus, they may have questions like, how could there be a God when there's so much evil and injustice in this world? That's a common question, and that's a fair question. They can't believe in a loving God, or there is such thing as a powerful God, when they look at the evidence of injustice and tragedies. And for Christians, even, we may have a question, you may have a question, and ask, how do you make sense? How can I make sense of the evil and injustice in this world? When there is a loving God, when there's a seemingly, the Bible tells us, powerful God who is in control. Now, we all seek justice in this world, whether you like it or not, big or small justice. We want it, we want justice, and we often find ourselves helpless about it. Now, Christian message is a message, actually, a message of triumph over all these things, over tragedy, over suffering, even over death itself. That's Christian message. But how we make sense of this? I think we can understand, if you are a Christian and you've been a Christian for a long time, suffering and tragedies are not unique to non-Christians, nor they are unique to Christians. It happens to everyone. So Christians, we are not supposed to be surprised when we are faced with tragedies and suffering in this life. We shouldn't be surprised by it. Now, of course, not only not surprised by it, we shouldn't be running away from it, nor running towards it. When they come, we ought to embrace it. Now, of course, when we face tragedy, when we face suffering in life, the Bible tells us we ought to grieve. But yet, at the same time, we ought to rejoice over it. Now, in our suffering, your faith and my faith is not only tested, but strengthened. You want to see a weak Christian? See one who always run away from any kind of suffering, who have all his life or her life been living in a comfortable life. That is a weak Christian. If you want to find and see a strong Christian, it's one who is not afraid to embrace suffering in their life. Let me read another quote, this time by a Chinese house church pastor in Chengdu, China. His name is Wang Yi. Perhaps you have heard of him. A few years ago, he was arrested, and he was known, and he's currently in prison. He's known for his uncompromised faith in Christ, even at the cost of imprisonment. And this is his quote, and I'm read to you. We tend to value and appreciate 24-karat gold because of its superior quality. An 18-karat Christian can hardly be considered a Christian. What separates 24-karat gold from 18-karat gold? It's gold that has been through suffering and high heat. Now, people suffer because we live, obviously, in a sinful and fallen world. Now, we're not supposed to read our Bible, Christians. We're not supposed to read our Bible for looking for steps on how to live a comfortable and good life, a tragedy-free life. That's not our goal. If you're a Christian this morning and listening to this word, your goal when you read the Bible is not, how can I get steps in order to have a good life and comfortable life? That's not the goal of the Bible. If that's the goal of the Bible, then stories like these, tragedies like these are not in the Bible. The Bible's main purpose is to show you your sin and brokenness, and to show you how in His mercy and grace God came down to save you from it. That's the purpose of the Bible. To show us, it's a mirror, how broken and sinful we are left to our own self, and how God in His mercy and grace came down to rescue us from it. One main problem in life is not the existence of evil and tragedy, but sin. That's Christians' problem. It's not so much that there's a lot of evil and suffering and tragedies in this world. Our problem is sin. Tragedies, sufferings, they're not our enemies. Sin is. Therefore, we need to reframe our question. If God is there, why there's so much evil and suffering? That's a wrong question to ask. We need to reframe this. And the late theologian R.C. Sproul once asked about this. He was asked, why do bad things happen to good people? And he responded, well, that only happened once in history, and he volunteered. And that's very true, of course. And he was referring to Jesus, the only true good person who ever walked on the face of the earth, and he wasn't murdered. He volunteered himself to be crucified, to rescue us from our sin. Not from tragedy, not from the escape of suffering in this world, but from our sin and our brokenness. And second point, on purpose. Let's read from Genesis 37, verse 19 to 20. This is Joseph's brothers. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him," Joseph, "and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." So Joseph is known as dreamers. He shared two of his dreams here in this passage. Now, without a purpose or dreams in life, we all have dreams. Perhaps you grow so old in life that you have abandoned all dreams. But growing up, we all have dreams. There are purpose. There are dreams in life. And Joseph had dreams. And you and I, we have dreams. Because without dreams, without purpose, you and I are as good as dead. And the brothers know this, you see. Joseph's brothers knew this. All they need to do is not killing Joseph, but to kill his dreams. That's enough for them. This is why they are satisfied to just sell him off to the Midianites, to the Ishmaelites, instead of killing him. Because all they need to do to Joseph is to kill his dream, to kill his purpose, you see. However, little did they know, these dreams of Joseph were not Joseph's dreams. They are God's given dreams to Joseph. And oftentimes when we read scripture, how do we know this will come true is when the Hebrew authors write it twice in a slightly different way. Later, Joseph will interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Again, the dreams will happen twice. So here, he had two dreams. And God is just telling them, this will come to pass. This will happen. Now, this is, of course, the way that the brothers did is to kill his dreams, is the way Satan's work these days as well, in your life, in my life. This is the most common strategies against God's children. What is that? Deceit. It's deceit. Satan lies about our life's purpose. Lied about your goal and your dreams that you're supposed to have in life. Without their full knowledge, Joseph's brothers not only did they kill Joseph's dreams, but they actually killed God's plan. They tried to kill God's plan. Not only for Joseph, but also for the world. Now, how do Satan's evil does this work of deceit in our life? There's two ways actually, quite simple ways, and how Satan lies about our life purpose. The first one is minimizing the importance and the impact of your dreams, your purpose in life. You say it's not important. Minimize it. It's okay. You just live your life. So they minimize the importance of it, the impact of it. It's so important for Christian to know what your life purpose is. If you don't take that seriously, you just live life just like anybody else, you have somehow, without realizing, have believed in Satan's lie in your life. The second thing, how Satan does this is by misdirecting, not only minimizing the impact and the importance of it, but by misdirecting your purpose to a lesser purpose of self-fulfillment. When you say, I want to be a great doctor so I can be famous or I can be rich, that's one of Satan's lies to today's Christian. To say that you need all this and that's important in your life. Misdirecting your purpose. You think that's a great purpose, but actually that's a much lesser purpose in life. Now, another lesson, of course, we could learn from this story is that why did Joseph's brother hate him so much? Enough to wanting to kill him. I know, if you have siblings, you know we have this, what we call siblings rivalry. Some worse than others. But not enough to kill us brothers or sisters. Grew up with siblings myself. I've got 2 older siblings and 1 younger one. There's 4 of us. And I fight the most with my closest one, my sister, my older sister. We hated each other. We fought a lot, like not just words, physical fight, right? I grew up learning Taekwondo, and I used her as my sparring partner, right? Of course, she didn't know how to do Taekwondo. But we grow out of that. Now, me and my sisters are the closest. So what did why did Joseph's brother hate him so much, enough to kill him? Well, the Bible tells us, if you are careful in or listening, it says like because they were jealous of him, because of his dreams, because Joseph has a dream. Joseph has a purpose. that God put in his life. Let's read from verse 3 onwards to 8. Now Israel, so we go back now a little bit. Now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than any other of his sons. There's 12 older brothers by this time, and daughters as well. Dinah was mentioned, but there, as you read carefully, when it says who console him, all the children, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters. So there's more than Dinah. The Bible only mentioned one name. So when, verse 3, because he was sons of his whole age, and he made him a robe of many colors. So Joseph, his favorite son, out of 12 sons, 12 children at least. And verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him. The first occurrence, it says they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Verse 5, now Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, what happened? They hated him even more. Second time. He said to them, hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brother said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more, the third time, for his dreams and for his words. So why did Joseph's brother hate him so much enough to kill his own brother, their own brother? The short answer is their sin, their jealousy. And all this is due to the sins of many people, not just the brother's sin. The brother's sins, Jacob's sin, Israel's sin, and also, of course, Joseph's sin himself. Now, that's the short answer. What caused them wanting to kill him is sin. But the longer answer is going to be in two parts. The first one is it started with Israel or Jacob's favoritism over on one of his sons, his favorite from his favorite wife. Right? So by this time, as I said, he had like at least 12 children and he favorited one. And he made sure the other children knows about it. You know, if you're parents, I'm a parent, sometimes we have a favorite child, sometimes we're a sinful being, yes. Sometimes we may have a favorite child, we try to hide it. You know, we don't try to make it obvious, they'll be dumb, right? But Jacob made sure the other children knows about it, that Joseph is his favorite. And you lot, the rest of you, I don't care much about you, you just go tend the sheep. So Israel, the reason is this, I think. Israel grew up wanting his father to love him. Remember? Jacob and Esau. His father favored Esau, his brother. So he grew up longing for his father's love. But his father, Isaac, loved Esau. And this favoritism, growing up to be the not favorite son, have shaped his life. In fact, shaped the rest of his life. And we saw how this worked out previously, how his eyes was transfixed when what happened when he saw a beautiful woman by the name of Rachel. He worked really hard in order to get Rachel. He wants Rachel. He wants her love. Yet what he got after working so hard for Rachel's father, all he got was Leah. The girl no man wanted. The girl that the father has to get rid of in secret by deceiving through deceit. So Leah wasn't loved, but God gave her children, lots of them. Rachel didn't have children for a long time. And then when she gave birth to the favorite son, Joseph. And Joseph was the 12th child, according to the scriptures, but could be more. We don't know because the daughters are not all mentioned. So Joseph, in a way, became the center of Jacob's life. Now, if you're parents, pay attention to this. This is so easy to get sucked into as parents, especially when you have only one child. But not only when you have only one, even when you have many, like in this case, Jacob had many, but especially if you have one. When your child, when Joseph becomes the center of his life rotate and orient around Joseph. He gave everything to Joseph. I mean everything. A robe, this multicolored robe or ornamental robe is crazy. No, none of the children have this. This robe fit for a noble prince or king. Now, there's nothing that Joseph wanted in his life or needed that Jacob didn't provide for him. Before Joseph could think of the new latest toy growing up, Jacob would have ordered that through Amazon Prime and make sure it's ready when Joseph asked for it, or even before Joseph asked for it. Joseph became Jacob's God. Now, if you're a parent, you may not see this coming, but if you're not careful, if we as parents are not careful, we can make our children as God in our life. Our lives are centered around our child. Whatever they want, whatever they needed, we drop everything. Now, Christians even, faithful Christians who serve the Lord, who come to church, when they have child, that started to drift away. They slowly drift away from loving God in that way, from worshiping together. They say, well, I'm busy. And then when the kids grow up, they say, oh, now my kids have sports on Sunday. What you're telling your kids are this: you are more important than God. You're more important than coming to church and worship Jesus and serving other people. Be careful that your life does not, that your child does not become your God in your life. So this sin destroys not only Jacob's, but his entire family. We've seen how this made Joseph's brothers hated him, wanting to kill him, to commit a murder. So what we're going to look at next is, what did this sin do to Joseph himself? What does it do to Joseph? So I said the sin is not just in Jacob's life, it's Jacob's fault, but also his brothers, but also in Joseph's. All of them are sinful. They sin against God. So what did this sin do to Joseph? Well, that's the second point, right? The first one is Israel, Jacob's favoritism. The second one is Joseph insensitivity. Like, let's read verse 2. This is the opening, right? This is the opening. This is how chapter 37 opens. These are the generation of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers, and he was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And pay attention to this. It says, and Joseph brought a bad report or ill report of them to their father. Now, if you have siblings, this is a no-no. You don't do this thing. This deserves corporal punishment. You don't do this to your sibling, okay? He brought ill report, bad report of the brothers to their father. Now, he was 17. This is not normal. This behavior is not normal. I can attest to you. If you have siblings, you know, this is not normal. You don't do this kind of stuff to your own sister or brother. And I can assure you, like I can tell you because I have two teens at home. I got a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old at home, boys, Judah and Levi. When one of them did something behind my back that they're not supposed to do, right? Let's just say playing a game when they're supposed to be studying or something like that. When one of them did that, they somehow had this brotherly arrangement, right? That they will never, ever dob each other in. I don't know where they go to school to learn this kind of thing and strategy, but I tried. I'm telling you, I tried. I even pressured them and threatened them. No, won't come out. Even though I know for a fact, I just need a witness. No, won't come out. They won't dob the other. But this is what Joseph did. And sounds like it was a normal thing. Like Joseph dobbed, Daddy, all these, my brothers, they're so lazy, they did this, they didn't do that and stuff. But then you can see, because of Joseph's favoritism, because of Jacob's favoritism, it has destroyed Joseph in a way, right? Which made his son, the center of his life, had turned Joseph, perhaps, into someone who is not kind. But even more, actually, as I dig deeper about this word of bad report, false report, ill report, most scholars believe this word is almost exclusively used for a false accusation. So it's not just a bad report, it's not a true report. You know how when people try to lift themselves out, how they do that is by putting others down. This is what Joseph is doing. In order to put his status up before his father, he put his brothers down before his father. Now, after the escalation of hate, they hated even more and more, because Joseph was just, his sensitivity meter is just dead, right? Like there's no battery or whatever, there's no power. He doesn't know, he can't sense this. So the brothers' hate of him escalate. And 3 times it escalated, right, in a short paragraph. And what happened next? He told them another dream. How dumb could you be, right? So verse 9, it says, after the hate was escalated 3 times, then in verse 9, he dreamt another dream and told it to his brothers. It's like, look at this. I had another dream, even more marvelous and more grand. Behold, I have a dream, another dream. Behold, the sun now. Not just the sheaf, but the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. That's Joseph. Humans' actions have consequences. Jacob's idolatry destroys his family, all his children. Your favoritism, if you're a parent, if you have a favorite one, you will destroy your child and your family. But the bigger question is this, that we want to go back to our first question. Where is God in all this? How can we make sense of this story, strange stories? When we read, don't we just want, here are the 3 things Christian must do. We want that, but it's not. God gave us story. So how can we make sense of this? Where is God in all this? Well, first of all, I can say is this. God has a purpose in Jacob's family and in Joseph's life. God has a purpose. Jacob, Joseph, his brothers, they're all living it out, God's purpose. They're all living it out, even though they may not know it yet. They're all living it out, God's purpose in their life. When life is full of tragedy, the greater tragedy is that a life without a purpose. Amidst all the tragedies and suffering in this life, the greater tragedy is a life lived out without purpose. Now, during times of war, the prisoners who managed to survive after enduring years of starvation and torture were often those who had a strong sense of purpose, a reason to keep on living. Their inner resolve anchored in something beyond the prison's wall. That's what keeps them alive. That's what gives them the strength to persevere despite the unimaginable suffering they are facing. They all face the same suffering and torture. Only those who have a strong sense of purpose that beyond the walls of the prison that survive. Having a purpose helps you and I, Christian, push through hard and difficult circumstances that you may face in this life. God has a purpose for each of you. Final point on God. Now, when you read this, there are just too many coincidences. For Joseph, in order for Joseph to be sold as slave, it wasn't as straightforward as listing it on Facebook Marketplace, a brother for sale. It wasn't like that at all. It needs a lot of coincidences for it to happen. In fact, there are just too many of them to be coincidences. For example, Joseph went out to find his brothers at Shechem, but he didn't find them there, right? And coincidentally, there was a man who found Joseph wandering in the field, looking lost. And the man, not just any man, this stranger, happened to have overheard Joseph's brothers talking that they are heading to Dothan. Just too many coincidences. Then after he met his brother, as they planned to kill Joseph, coincidentally again, there was pit to throw him in. Out of all the places where you feed the sheep and stuff, tend the sheep, there's pits. And for whatever reason, Reuben, the eldest, who planned, remember Reuben was saying, let's not kill our brother, and he planned to save him, right? Reuben happened to went away. We weren't told where did Reuben go. He's just not there. And this gave the opportunity for the other brothers to sell Joseph. Where did he go? I don't know. It's just coincidence. And at that moment, that very moment when, I don't know how long Reuben went away for, at that moment, coincidentally, a trader came by on his way to Egypt. There are many, many of seemingly coincidences beyond this story in the life of Joseph for God's plan to be carried out. And we shall see this in the coming weeks and months. Often in our life, coincidences or coincidence in our life are nothing more than God's sovereign providence where He prefers to be anonymous. If you read chapter 37, there's not a single mention of God. But yet, God is everywhere in this story. When we understand God's purpose, life's coincidences become His sovereign providence over our life. If we continue reading the book of Genesis till the end, we will learn that without all these quote-unquote coincidences, many people will die, including God's own people, Israel. God's plan wasn't simply for the brothers to bow down. That's what the dreams, right? To bow down before Joseph. That's part of God's plan, but ultimately that's not God's plan. That's not just God's plan for the brothers and the father to bow down before him. Though that too will happen, God's plan was to raise Joseph to be the second most powerful person throughout the land in order to save many from death by famine, including his own family, his brothers. So Joseph later, fast forward a few chapters to the end of Genesis, now he's the powerful man in the land, and the brothers facing famine came to him, begging. They didn't know that Joseph survived, let alone now become one of the most powerful men who rule over the land. And when Joseph met his brothers, I don't know about you, the normal reaction is that you'll be so angry and you just want to slap them in the face, right? But this is what Joseph said to his brothers. Genesis 45, 7-8. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. Who sent Joseph? Who sold Joseph? Brothers. But he said to his brothers, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And then he also said to them in Genesis 50, verse 20, as for you, brothers, by this time in this context, they were bowing down before Joseph. And he said, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Now, many of you are worried about your life, about your family, about your elderly parents, about your children. Now, I always tell parents this, parents who are overly concerned and worried about their children, that parenting is by grace, not by skill. Parenting is by grace. Yes, we must do our best, but ultimately God is in control. When your children turn out to be successful men, you cannot take credit for it. You cannot say, oh, I'm such a great dad, I'm such a great mom. Don't worry about them. You can't take credit for it. God is in control. You cannot look down on other people. It's all right. You cannot look down on other people whose kids don't turn out as well as your own kids. No, I've seen parents do this all the time. They don't even wait for their kids to grow up, become successful person. They just need to be in school, in primary school, and they say, oh, my kid's so good. He did all his maths, so good at sports, and looked down on other kids who are not so good at maths and sports. Parenting is by grace, not by skill. If your kids turn out to be great, thanks be to God. But the opposite is true as well. When your kids didn't turn out so well, your life will go on. You don't have to beat up on yourself and say you're such a failure, because parenting is by grace. God is in control. So what parents need most, if you're a parent, that what you need most desperately is not parenting skills, though you need them, but praying skill. What you need most is not parenting skill, but praying skills. You need to be more, not on the books of how to parent, but on your knees and praying to God for God's will to happen in your child's life. How many times we lecture our kids, parents, compared to how many times or how often we pray for them. Sadly, even for Christians, there's this huge gap between their parenting time, lecturing time, and teaching time to their children compared to their praying time over their children. Now, in life's many tragedies, we like to cry foul to God, don't we? Don't need to be Christian to cry foul to God. We say things like, where was God? For example, last Thursday when Mila was hit and killed. Is God really there? Does God really care? Does He love us? God may be hidden, but He's not sleeping. God doesn't turn a blind eye, ever. Not only in a tragedy, but also in evil. He does not turn a blind eye. The Apostle Paul writes this in Romans 8:28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. What things? All things. You know what all things in Greek means? It means all things. Everything. Work together for good. Now, not all that we experience in life will be good. That's not what it's saying. We will experience bad things, suffering, evil in our life. Not all things will be good, but God will work everything, bad, good, worse, terrible, everything, including evil and tragedies, for good. That's what God's promise is. Now, about 400 years later, after Joseph's story, God revealed Himself to Moses. We've seen this in the book of Exodus last year. Exodus 34, verse 6 to 7. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed before Moses, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, that Hebrew word hesed, and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generations. God revealed Himself to Moses. In verse 6 it says, He is merciful, He's gracious, He's slow to anger, abounding in hesed, in steadfast love, in covenant love. But in verse 7, He says, God will not clear the guilty. God will visit the iniquity, not only to the father, but the father's children and the children's children to the third and fourth generations. Now, this is the consequences of sin. They can be long-lasting. Your sin today could be because of the sin of your fathers. But your sin today will affect your children and your children's children, right? That's what the Bible says. Now, this is difficult to take in. It's not easy for a Christian to take this in. We like verse 6, that He's slow to anger, He's gracious and merciful. But this in verse 7, that's hard to take in. But if you read carefully, they're actually there for us to provide us comfort. How can it be? Because it tells us that God, our God, Yahweh, is not a soft God. He's not a softie. Our God is not a softie. The Lord is gentle, but He's not soft. There's a huge difference. Gentle enough to handle the broken and strong enough to protect the weak. That's our God. And the Lord is perfectly just. That's what verse 6 and 7 is telling us. Sin must be paid in full. The wrath of God is His justice. This is Christianity. This is the gospel. sin will not just be swept under the rug and forgotten. It must be paid. While sin, family sin like Jacob's sin, trickles down to the third and fourth generations, God's hesed love is for 1,000 generations. It was there to provide comfort to us. The consequences of sin may last a third, fourth generations, but God's mercy and grace and faithfulness last 1,000 generations. What does it mean that His love and hesed love lasts 1,000 generations? It doesn't mean that when it gets to 1,001, His hesed love stops. No, it means it lasts forever. There's a lot of similarities here between Joseph and Jesus. So I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of these. Because God turned evil deeds in this story for the ultimate good. That is to fulfill the plan of salvation for many people, right? For Israel, God used Joseph's tragedy to save the nation. For the nations, God used Jesus' tragedy on the cross to save the world. Joseph was sold by his own brothers for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was sold by his own disciple for 30 pieces of silver. Joseph was sold against his will, but Jesus was crucified willingly. He volunteered. Joseph saved his family from death caused by famine. Jesus saved the world from eternal death caused by sin, yours and mine. Now, God's name and God may not have been mentioned in this chapter, yet as we have seen, God's fingerprints are everywhere in this story. It matters not how bad your situation is right now that you are facing in life. God can turn, and He will turn it for good according to His purpose. You may not see it yet. Joseph cannot see it at that time. But He will turn it for good. Paul writes to the persecuted Christians in Rome to encourage and strengthen them in Romans 8:18. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. He said, compared to the glory, this suffering, though it's horrible and terrible, it's nothing. You will forget about it in a split second. Imagine living out a life of purpose with that kind of determination. A Christian with a spine of steel. You can go through the ups and downs of life just like anybody else, yet you know God is at work. You know that He's working all things together for your good because He loves you and cares for you. And the Lord gets all the glory when that happens. If you are successful because you work really hard and you rejoice, God doesn't get the glory. You get the glory. But when you get beaten up, when you get the same cancer that everyone else gets, when you get the same redundancy that everyone else gets, yet you rejoice and glorify Him and lift His name up high, God gets the glory. Christians need to know how to glorify God and to rejoice in suffering. God is not absent. He never sleeps, never. You may not for certain know why God allows anyone to suffer. We may not know that ever. Just like Job didn't know the reason why he suffered. God never feel like He has to explain to Job. In a day, he lost his family, all his children, all his wealth in a day. Towards the end, God didn't feel like He has to explain to Job. He's God. So you may not know why you experience all this suffering and tragedies in your life, but you can know for sure that it is not because God doesn't love you or care. That we can know for sure, because He cared enough to come down and die for you, for your sin. Let us pray.